Well, today what I want to do is just finish up this chat about biological evolution and essentially throw away all the complexity and start talking about Markov chains. So, I think you'll see what I mean by that as we go along. So, remember that we had this sort of stripped down picture of biological evolution. And it's stripped down for many reasons, one of which is that we think of time as being discrete instead of continuous. And you have a population P of t. So that's the population at time t. And this is a set of individuals, each of which has a type. And the type is sort of a bipartite thing consisting of a genotype and a phenotype. Genotype is like the genome, and the phenotype is like some summary of the traits of the individual that are relevant to whether it reproduces, survives, whatever. And you can think of it also as, and so I want to put equals in quotes, a multiset of types. If you just ignore the fact that, say, two different individuals can have the same type and just think of having two copies of the same type in this multiset, that's the way you can think of it. Okay? And you have this PG of t and P phi of t associated with P of t. PG of t is just the set of all genotypes of individuals in P of t. P phi of t is just the set of all phenotypes of individuals in P of t. And then you have this big picture here, where if you have a population at time t, then mediated by complicated random effects, you have this operation sigma that selects, that's what sigma stands for, a set of individuals R of t. Those are the individuals in P of t who are selected to reproduce. And then those guys mix their genotypes in whatever way, subject to a bunch of random effects, with this genetic operator gamma. And that gives you the set of genotypes of the population at time t plus 1. And then they develop, subject to a bunch of random effects, via this operator delta, into P phi of t plus 1. And now you have, along with the PG of t plus 1, you have all of P of t plus 1. So that's a very stripped down model of how this operates. And the sigma cares only about the phenotypes in the population at time t, and the delta, or the gamma, cares only about the genotypes in the selected individuals R, G, and T. All right, so that's our stripped down model, and I wanted to talk about three even more stripped down models for how this works. And we talked about one of them last time, and I want to finish talking about the second one and then mention quickly the third one. So here's three super simple models. One of them that we talked mostly, we almost finished last time, was Beanbag Genetics. And in Beanbag Genetics, you think of G and phi as being vectors of the same dimension. And each element of G determines the corresponding element of phi. So Gi determines phi. And that determination doesn't have any kind of random mitigation, or random mediation, I should say. Okay, so what this does, this determination by the ith gene of the ith trait, so to speak, that gets rid of both the randomness and the complexity in this developmental operator that takes genotypes to phenotypes. And the gamma operator works pretty much as before, as it does for, we talked about crossover and mutation, all that sort of thing. But the sigma operator, how does the sigma operator work on this? In the simplest beanbag genetic models, if you can imagine there are levels of this, in the simplest beanbag genetic models, the fitness that determines whether somebody reproduces, so you can have sigma either, and this is the one we talked about last time, completely exogenous. And I talked about the words endogenous and exogenous last time. And exogenous means coming from the outside. Endogenous means depending on what's there. And in this case, it's just some aggregation of the quote-unquote fitnesses, whatever they are, of the individual traits. In phi. Or you could have it, and this is one I didn't talk about last time, endogenous but still deterministic. In other words, the fitness of phi depends on the population at time t and not just on phi of p. Okay? But still, both of these ways of looking at sigma get rid of the randomness, so both views ignore the random effects in sigma. One of them is a little more sophisticated than the other, but they're still not realistic at all. All right. Second one is the one I called gene selection ism. And this is along the lines of Dawkins, what he talks about in his books, The Blind Watchmaker, and also The Selfish Gene, and The Extended Phenotype. There are a whole bunch of books he wrote, these popular science books on evolution, that are really good to read, but they sort of become increasingly polemical as you go through his career. So I would recommend reading The Blind Watchmaker and then stopping there for a while. And then maybe go and read The Selfish Gene. But when you read The Extended Phenotype, you can almost feel him, sort of rubbing his hands together, saying, now, look at this. This is something no one ever thought of, We're just a product of our genes, that kind of thing. Anyway, it's kind of... In this case, still, phi and g are vectors, but they're not even necessarily of the same dimension. And the G to phi mapping is not element by element, as it was in Beanbag Genetics. So I want to say it can be complicated. And this accounts for these actual biological effects of pleiotropy, which is one gene affecting many traits, and polygyny, or polygeny. I don't know how you say it. Trevor, do you know? Polygyny? Sounds pretty British, eh? Yeah, I don't know. Well, he's British, so whatever. That we talked about last time. But it still ignores the randomness in delta, and Dawkins does not pretend that that randomness doesn't exist. That's what some people accuse him of doing. What he says is, yes, there's randomness, but all other things being equal, it averages out, so we don't have to worry about it. So this sort of, quote-unquote, averages out the randomness in delta. Okay, so at the very end of class last time, what I was about to do is tell you about the kind of the selection model, which is kind of interesting. So the model for sigma is kind of interesting. It's wholly endogenous. For one thing. But it takes account of sort of the way that selection really happens. And the analogy that he draws, and you can take this analogy and you can overwork it. Okay, but it's a cool analogy. The analogy is to a rowing team. And how does that go? All right, let me just give you a quick description here. If you're talking about an 8-man crew or 8-person crew, so 8-person boats, you have this boat, right? And it has 8 people sitting in it, plus, well, actually it has 9 people sitting in it. It has 9 rowers. And if you're a rower and someone calls you a rower, you say, no, I'm not a rower, I'm an oarsman. Okay, I know this by having known lots of rowers over the years. But anyway, you have 8 rowers and a coxswain. Okay? So imagine there's a coach, and the coach needs to keep a good team running. Okay, so the coach needs to assemble a good team of rowers. And what happens every now and then is that new rowers enter the pool of rowers from which he has to choose his team. So new rowers enter periodically. And you can think of this as, say, mutation occurs. And what the coach has to do, because he only has space for maybe 50 people on the team, or I guess it ought to be a multiple of 8 or 9, so say 63 people on the team, the coach has to cut some people. So the coach has to make cuts. To keep the team small-ish. Okay, so what does the coach do? Let's imagine that every rower has a specialty. If you look at an 8-person boat, you have 8 rowing seats. The one sitting by the coxswain, facing the coxswain, is called the stroke. That stroke has to be a very steady rower and really obedient to the coxswain and sets the rhythm for the whole boat. Then the ones behind the stroke are seats 7, 6, 5. Those are really strong rowers. Those are like, that's where the power comes from in the boat. And the ones bringing up the rear, the one at the very end, at the other end from the coxswain, is called the bow, because that's the direction the boat is going. Remember, you're all facing backwards and the boat's going this way. There's bow, 2, 3, 4. Those guys don't really have to be very strong. They don't have to be super rhythmic like the stroke. But anyway, the point is that each seat in the boat has candidates for that seat, specialists. So imagine that every rower specializes for one of the 8 seats in the boat, bow through stroke. And Dawkins carries this on, by the way, and talks about some of the rowers are left-handed, some of them are right-handed. I'm not going to worry about that. Okay. So imagine every rower specializes for one of the 8 seats in the boat. Thus, you have a bunch of 2-seat candidates, a bunch of 3-seat candidates, a bunch of stroke candidates, and so on. Okay? So how does the coach decide which rowers to cut after a new infusion of specialists? What the coach does is run a bunch of races. And you can think of these as 2 or 3 boat races between boats that are assembled at random. So, for example, the coach picks a stroke at random from the set of all possible strokes and puts him in the stroke seat. The coach picks a 2-seat rower at random from the set of all 2-seat rowers and puts him in the 2-seat of one of these boats. So the coach selects a stroke at random from the stroke set, etc. Okay, so the coach runs these races, a bunch of them, and you can imagine if you have a reasonable number of rowers on the team, there's a lot of possibilities for these randomly chosen boats. There's a lot of possibilities for 2 or 3 boat races between these boats. So there's no way the coach is going to be able to pair off every possible boat against every possible other boat, but he does it for a while, you know. And you're going to tire those rowers out if you're, you know, running them again and again and again against each other the same day. But anyway, what the coach does is for each rower, the coach records how many wins, how many losses. And since the coach is looking to cut rowers, I'm just going to think of the coach as recording losses. So for each rower, the coach records how many losses in these races. And after having run a bunch of the races, no way to cover all the possibilities. What the coach does is he looks at all, say, the 2 rowers, and he cuts the 1 or 2 or 3, the ones that have the most losses. So coach cuts the rowers for each seat with the most losses. And then he's back to the size team he wants. And then some more rowers come in, and he goes through this again. So more new rowers arrive. Repeat, etc. Okay, so what's going on here? What's the analogy all about? You think of each seat in a boat as being a place where a gene could be in a genome, right? And each of the individual rowers who might sit in that seat is a different allele of that gene. And an individual boat assembled from a 2-seat, a 3-seat up through a stroke, that's a genome, okay? A particular genome that has particular alleles for each of the genes. And its performance in these races is a manifestation of its phenotype, how good the phenotype is. And the effect of doing it this way is that what the coach is doing is he's picking rowers to keep who are not necessarily individually the strongest, say 7 rower or something like that, but row well with each other. So if, for example, there's one particular 3-seat rower and a particular 5-seat rower who happen to gel really well on boats, and they happen to appear in a bunch of boats in these races, then they're probably going to end up being kept, okay? And maybe the strongest, the steadiest stroke or the strongest 7 rower might not end up being kept because he doesn't work as well with others. So the effect is that you're selecting, that is to say, not cutting from the team, rowers who work well together, and even perhaps with a variety of boatmates. And that's kind of how selection actually works. Like, you could have a really good trait, like you could have the sharpest eyes in the universe, right? But maybe you're crappy at everything else. You know, you make bad food selections, you know, you don't sleep enough, like you guys probably don't sleep enough, whatever. And therefore, you know, you're not as fit because that trait, that eye trait, doesn't work so well with these other traits, or ends up randomly getting caught in a boat with these other bad traits. Now, there's 2 things I want to note here. So 2 important observations. First of all, there's no linear ordering necessarily on all possible boats, the set of all possible phenotypes. So there's you can't sort of quote-unquote linearly order all the boats, all the possible boats, that is to say phenotypes, in order of quote-unquote fitness of some kind. And that's the endogeny of the fitness. Now, how do I mean that? Say boat A could beat boat B, so A maybe beats B, who beats C, but C might beat A, just like the scissors, paper, rock example. And again, I apologize for my unorthodox name for that game. How could this happen? Well, perhaps the rowers in boat A are very sensitive to a big wake, and the rowers in boat C happen to create a big wake when they row. So if you race boat C against boat A loses. But maybe boat B doesn't create a big wake by virtue of the physical traits of the rowers or whatever, and A might beat B. Or something like the wind could be really bad in the race where C meets A, and C might be relatively insensitive to the wind, A might be sensitive to the wind. There's an environmental kind of effect. But the point is, there's no way to get some exogenous fitness function on boats. And another thing is that even if there were a boat that would, under any circumstances, beat every other boat, that boat might never happen to appear in this finite bunch of races the coach is allowed to run. So even if a quote-unquote best boat existed, it might never appear over the course of these one-loss kind of races. So the pairing off process. So survival of the fittest, again, called into question. The fittest might be a best possible boat, but it might never happen to arise. Okay, so I think this is kind of an interesting selection model, and like I said, you could push it too hard. You can demand too much of it. You okay, Albert? Okay. Just want to make sure. Don't give your cold to Alex and Matt. All right. All right. So anyway, that's an interesting selection model. And anyway, the gamma in this case operates, so in this gene selectionist model, again, gamma operates much as before. In other words, you're sort of crossing over these boats, whatever. Okay, finally, the last one, and I'm not going to spend hardly any time on this, I'm just going to mention it. You can ignore completely the gamma level, the genetic level, and just talk about populations of phenotypes and how they evolve. So you sort of ignore the sort of gamma level completely, and you concentrate on evolution of phenotypes only, and you just sort of say, well, underneath all this, there's some kind of genetic mixing that's going on, and the details of that don't really matter to us. What we're concerned about is the phenotypes of the individuals in the population, and given this all this random stuff that happens underneath, we have a new population that depends randomly on the current population and so on. So this is an operant. Phenotypes only. And this point of view, you may say, well, you know, why is that interesting? It turns out that this is kind of the model that classic evolutionary game theory looks at. So this is the model that pervades what I would call classical. And it's always funny when you talk about classical something that's only been around for 30 years or something, evolutionary game theory. There's no sort of genetic model. You have these populations of strategies in a game, and if you've read the chapter in the book, you've seen an example of that where you're talking about the prisoner's dilemma. But anyway, we'll have more to say about that kind of thing later. Okay, now one thing all these models have in common that biological evolution does not feature as a property is the following. So all these models have a common feature. And that is that whatever random effects enter are history independent. So the randomness that enters at any stage of the process, whether it be the gamma thing where you're assembling new genomes and crossing over boats and all that sort of thing, choosing boats to race against each other, whatever. The randomness that enters at any stage is history independent. Now, what do I mean by history independent? That's one of those things that you have to be careful. It's really a statement, a mathematical statement. So what is the mathematical statement here? The mathematical statement is essentially what's going on here is that you, if you know P of t, if you know the population at time t, then you may not be able to figure out exactly what P of t plus 1 is, but at least you can figure out a probability distribution over all possible populations at time t plus 1. So if you know P of t, you may not be able to figure out P of t plus 1, but you can, in principle at least, figure out a probability distribution over possibilities for P of t plus 1. And what populations happened before time t do not enter into this computation. So whatever populations preceded P of t have no effect on this computation. And in terms of probability, what this means is that these models are all Markov models. They're Markov chains, essentially, on population space. And that's what we're going to be focusing on later on. I'll get more into technically what is a Markov chain, what is the Markov property, and all that kind of thing. But let me just say for now, i.e. P of t, the set of all P of t's, is a Markov chain. And more on that later. Okay. The problem is that biological evolution, yeah.
I was wondering, say it's history independent for this computer, it's got P minus 1. So like, doesn't it in some degree take into account this?
P of t, the point of the Markov property is that whatever you need to know about P of t minus 1 is summarized in your knowledge of P of t. You don't need any more info about what populations preceded it. Like, many different P of t minus 1s might have led to this particular P of t. Which one, it doesn't matter for computing the probability distribution over P of t plus 1, given that you know P of t. That's the Markov property. Okay? And as I said a moment ago, the problem is that real biological evolution does not have this property. So this is emphatically not true of biological evolution. How come? This is one of the points that Lewontin drives home in that book that I told you about, the one, Biology is Ideology, the Doctrine of DNA. And also in the book, the other book that I have by him, which is called The Triple Helix, Gene, Organism, and Environment. There's all kinds of cool observations he makes, like, the environment does not come from the outside, organisms make their own environment, and so on and so on. But anyway, I don't want to go wax eloquent about these wonderful books that I put on the website. I'm hoping you have a look at them. You can borrow my copies if you want, whatever. It's not true of biological evolution. How come? Many different past histories of a population might lead to the same P of T. So for example, many different population trajectories, so to speak, might lead to the same P of T. Okay. Now, along some of these populations trajectories, you might have populations that are like squeaky clean. They don't leave behind any arsenic underground. They don't pump carbon into the atmosphere, whatever. They don't burn all the forests, you name it. Some of them, on the other hand, some of the same population trajectories lead to the same P of T might be dirty. They might leave a lot of arsenic. They might, just pollute the environment somehow, globally warm the planet, whatever. Okay, so some histories might, for example, be quote-unquote dirtier than others. Perhaps leaving behind lots of arsenic, say. And I don't know why I thought of arsenic, but it's one of those classic poisons that occur in operas and all that sort of thing. So what happens at time t? If the population trajectory that led up to time t leaves behind a lot of arsenic, then who is fit at time t might depend heavily on, say, arsenic resistance, right? Like if you have a gene for arsenic resistance, that won't matter if at time t the population has been led up to by a non-dirty arsenic population, but it will matter if the history leading up to time t was arsenic heavy. So at time t, an individual, and I'm being really abstract gene. Remember, we don't even know what a gene is. We don't know what a trait is, but I'm going to talk about them as if we did. An individual with a quote-unquote gene for arsenic resistance would be more likely to be selected but if the history was arsenic heavy, but not if the history were not arsenic heavy. So not so otherwise. So in other words, in this case, what I'm saying is that the selection operator, the sigma that leads to the set of individuals who are allowed to reproduce, depends on the history. Who's fit at time t depends on that. And there's a lot of other things that happen here. So the bottom line is biological evolution is not Markovian. It's not a Markov chain. And by the way, if you're worried about the whole continuous versus discrete time thing, you can do a whole theory of Markov chains in continuous time. We're not going to do that this semester, but that's a red herring. Don't worry about that as being a mathematical abstraction for now. Just want to say one more thing about biological evolution and the culture of biologists who talk about it. So the bottom line is that biological evolution is not Markovian. Okay, so one more item, and this is more about the culture of science than anything else, that there is lots of wasted breath, lots of extra papers written, videos made, polemics delivered, etc. So lots of people lots of scientists spend, and I'll put this in parentheses with a question mark, waste question mark, a lot of time debating the answer to the following question. Quote, at what level does selection operate? Okay, now, why is that an issue? I've modeled selection here, the sigma, as only caring about the phenotypes. That's true. It only cares about the phenotypes. But what the gene selectionists, a lot of them do, is they say, well, through the phenotypes, it depends only on the genotypes. And so those folks get accused of saying, quote, selection operates at the level of the gene and not at the level of the organism, unquote. Even though they aren't really doing that, they're just kind of doing that, whatever. And the folks who say, no, it occurs at the level of the organism, accuse those others of reductionism. And if they're really mad at them, they say, not only do they say you're being reductionist, they say you're being reductionistic. Okay? See how much more edge that has to it. And others even say, no, it operates at the level of the population or at the level of the species. You know, people survive because their survival is good for the species. That's almost completely debunkable. Okay? But there's still people who say that. What, Andrew, you think it occurs at the level of the species? It's a funny argument. Well, you know, here's the kind of thing. Like, say you're in a class and, you know, you cheat or you have a way of cheating and you cut everyone in on it. Then everyone advances. Everyone gets a good job, right? Because you all get an A. So cheating occurs. But I don't know. Anyway. Okay. What's that? I wasn't suggesting. Maybe it's operating on your subliminal suggestibility, whatever. But in my opinion, it's fun to read this stuff, but it's kind of a waste of their time. And I don't consider it a waste of my time to read it because it's kind of cool, because you sort of see the complications of the culture of the science. But to me, the reality, in my opinion, is that there is interesting science going on at every level of this process, at the phenotype level, at the species level, at the population level, all the way down to the genetic level, and even to the nucleotide level. So there's cool science at every level in the hierarchy. Okay, so end of discussion of biological stuff. And once again, this won't be on the test, for one thing. Second thing is, what is it for? It's for two reasons. First of all, to show you how crazy complex biological evolution is. Second of all, to emphasize some complexities about it that we are going to strip away. Like, for example, we're going to be talking about Markov chains on population space. And you may say, well, what, biological evolution is not? No, I'm not worried about biological evolution. I want to talk about Markov chains on population space because that's what evolutionary algorithms are, essentially, is Markov chains on population space. So it's to show you how complex biological evolution is, to make you understand what's missing from all the applications, the inspiration that people have drawn from this to solve real-world problems, and finally, to maybe give you inspiration to pull more of the complexity out of this and apply it in the future. Okay, so now let's kind of shift gears. So I want to shift gears and tell you that what I'm going to mean when I say evolutionary process in this course is essentially always going to be the following. The phrase evolutionary process, notwithstanding the non-Markovian-ness of biological evolution, what we're going to mean is a Markov chain on population space. And if there's one phrase that's going to come up more than any other over the course of the semester, it's going to be that, Markov chain on population space. So what is a Markov chain? What is population space? Whatever. Let's talk about that a bit. And over the course of this, I'm going to go through some examples, a couple of really simple examples, just to show you the kind of thing that you can do. Okay, so first of all, what is population space? What is population space? It's going to be a set of possible populations. Fair enough? Okay, that raises another question. What is a population, right? A population, and we've already kind of alluded to this, is going to be a multi-set of individuals. I've already told you what a multi-set is. We'll go through some examples in a few minutes. The populations in population space in a given context might be all of the same size. Okay, it's possible that the populations in population space all have the same size. Have the same size, meaning the same number of individuals. Or maybe not. Okay, you could have a few big populations, a few small populations, whatever. Generally, we're going to concentrate on situations where the populations and population base all have the same size. So, for example, in a genetic algorithm that considers the evolution of bit strings, you'll say, okay, well, we looked at a population size 100. Well, that means that every step of the way you're dealing with a new population of bit strings, and there's 100 bit strings in that population. Okay, so usually we're going to assume they have the same size. And we could even go so far as to let populations be infinite, but that raises a lot of analytical problems. So we're always going to assume, we're going to generally assume that populations are finite. The number of populations may not be finite, but every population is finite. And what this does is avoid sort of analytical problems. And just to raise what, in my opinion, is the most serious analytical problem associated with infinite populations, what does it mean to pick an individual at random from an infinite set? Okay, what does that mean? Uniformly at random. What does that mean?
Take 1 out of infinity.
Yeah. It's very dangerous when you start talking about that. Because there are ways of, say, having half of the individuals being zeros and half of them being ones where I don't even want to go there. So, for example, quote unquote, pick an individual at random from a countably infinite set. Even when things are countable, it's difficult.
Don't populations grow and shrink?
Yeah, well, that's why in general populations are allowed to have different sizes. Okay, but once again, that's one of the things that people, when they're dealing, most of the genetic algorithms and stuff, in fact, all the evolutionary algorithms usually deal with fixed size populations. It's kind of hard to get the data structure so that the computations you have to make en route are efficient unless you have finite populations, or same size populations. But yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so that's one thing.
Professor,
Yeah.
you just said about population shrinking and expanding. But if you were to do it with data, wouldn't you do it discretely as having time of p of t and then p of t plus 1?
I don't understand your question.
So he said populations grow and shrink,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
That's in relation to time. isn't it?
Yes, yes. So P of t might have 50 individuals, and P of t plus 1 might have 5.
Correct. So when you're analyzing data, wouldn't you do it like that? Like when you're doing analytically, wouldn't you have like time 0 and then time 1? Wouldn't you run the algorithm over that? I mean,
Well, you would, but say you want to have a data structure in a computer and you have a population, say, of size 50 at time 0 of bit strings of length 8. Okay? So what you have is you have like 8 registers, or sorry, 50 registers, each of which has an 8-bit string in it. And what you want to do is you want to snap ahead to the next population of 50-bit strings. And see what I mean? So if you have a data structure that can remain fixed in the computer, you know, this is my population time t. It's just these 400 points of memory, so to speak, right? That's what I mean by efficiency of computation is aided by fixed size over time of populations. That's all. All right. So anyway, so that's where we're generally going to assume. Okay, so Markov chain. What is a Markov chain? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Now that we know what population space is, set of populations, now we know what a population is. It's a multi-set of individuals. Before we talk about what is a Markov chain, I want to postpone that. I want to talk about a couple of examples. Now, I know that Andrew knows what a Markov chain is because he took 4110, right? Okay, how many other people have seen Markov chains in another course? Which course? Machine learning. And Kyle? Optimization. 3100 they did them. They probably did finite state Markov chains, right? Where they have a matrix. They didn't probably do countable state Markov chains, right? In too much depth. Did they talk about transient and recurrent states? Absorbing. Yeah, okay, cool. Well, you know, some of you have seen this stuff before. Some of you haven't. And you can all help me out here. Those who have seen a lot of it, okay, when I ask a question, okay, then this is for you, among others. What I'm going to do is I'm going to poll the class on a couple of questions. Like, what does your intuition tell you is going to happen here? I don't want you to jump in and say, well, because of my background in Markov chains, I happen to know. You know, so just let other people struggle with those questions. All right? Okay, so let's look at a couple of quickie examples. And actually, that's a good time for the 3-minute break. Let's do the 3-minute break, and then I want to look at sort of 2.5 examples for the rest of class today, just to show you the kind of thing we're going to be looking at. For those of you watching at home, I just gave away some really important information about the midterm. Okay, so ask your friends. No, I know there's a couple people who are not here today who will probably watch this at some point. Okay, so let's look at a couple of toy examples. But these are toy examples, but they illustrate some of the kinds of things that you're looking at. Okay, so suppose you've got the following situation. Suppose that your populations all have some size, let's call it capital N. So all the populations in population space have size capital N. And what are the individuals in these populations? There are going to be 3 possible individuals. So 3 possible individuals. And the first 2 are going to be 0 and 1. So those are 2 of the possible individuals. And think of these as being, quote unquote, live individuals. And the reason I'm separating live from dead is that I want to keep the populations of size n. And a box, okay, that's a, quote unquote, dead body, so to speak. All right. So there's 3 possible individuals in these populations of size n. So here's some example populations. Say when n equals 5, here are some populations. Okay. 0, 0, 0, 1 box. Or 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's a possible population. Or all boxes. Those are all possible populations. All right, so how do these populations evolve over time? Here's how. So P of t gives rise to P of t plus 1 as follows. Okay? If there's a box in the population, that box persists to the next population. Dead bodies don't disappear. So every box in P of t remains as a member of P of t plus 1. Okay? What if you're a 0 in population P of t? Well, every 0 in P of t, there's 3 things that can happen. Okay? It either gives birth to a box, it dies with probability epsilon bigger than 0. Epsilon is small. What's that?
It's a lot better than giving birth to a box.
Yeah. Yeah, it dies with probability epsilon bigger than 0. That is to say, it becomes a box in P of t plus 1. Okay? And then the 2 other things that can happen are it gives birth to a 0 and then dies and disappears. And that happens with probability 1 minus epsilon divided by 2. And the other possibility is it gives birth to a 1 and then disappears. And that happens also with probability 1 minus epsilon divided by 2. So those are the 3 things that can happen. And similarly, every 1 in P of t, the same. So every 1 in P of t, it dies with probability epsilon. It turns into or gives birth to a 1 with probability 1 minus epsilon over 2. And it gives birth, turns into whatever, a 0 with probability 1 minus epsilon over 2. Okay, so every individual has a positive but perhaps very small probability of becoming a box. Okay? And a relatively large probability of giving birth to live offspring who becomes a member of population at time t plus 1. Okay. Now, I want to talk about just a couple of hand-wavy properties of this kind of model here. First of all, and by the way, let's use the following terminology. If at any time the population consists of all boxes, so here's terminology. If P at any time t is all box, we say that the population has gone extinct. Okay, so that's just so I have a one-word characterization of that situation. And because of the first rule of evolution, that a box gives birth to a box, so to speak, once a population is extinct, it's extinct forever. So thus, once extinct, extinct forever. And by the way, all these probabilistic operations above happen independently of each other and independently of history. So let me just point that out. These happen independently. That is to say, what happens to a given 0 in population at time t does not depend on what happens to anybody else in population at time t of each other and history. There's no influence of the history on whether a 0 gives birth to a 0, dies, or gives birth to a 1. Okay? All right, so let me just ask you quickly. Is there a positive probability that the population goes extinct at time 1?
There's positive probability.
Yeah. So here's a question. Let's start with the all zero population, just for definiteness. So suppose P of 0 is equal to all zeros. Can the population go extinct? Can extinction occur at t equals 1 with positive probability? This is an easy question. So how many people think yes? Okay, how many people think no? Don't be afraid. Okay, someone who thought yes, tell me why. Why don't you tell me why you think?
So they each have a positive probability individually, and the probability of all of them would be a positive probability.
Yeah, exactly. Because of the independence assumption, which was unspoken but thought, each of these individuals has probability epsilon of becoming a box in exactly one time step. So yes, or actually, let's put it this way, the answer is yes. And this happens with probability epsilon to the n. Because everybody has to die. Everybody has to boxify in order for the population to go extinct at time 1. Now notice that this population is very small when n is very large. So larger n implies smaller probability of extinction in one time step. Okay, so having dangled that bait in front of you, let me ask you another question. So here's another question. Is there a positive probability that the population never goes extinct? That's part 1 of the question. And if so, does that positive probability of never going extinct depend in some fashion on epsilon, which is the probability of boxifying, and or on n, the size of populations? So how does that probability depend on n and epsilon, and or epsilon? Okay. So how many people think there's a positive probability, could be very small, that the population never goes extinct? How many people think that? Okay. And intuitively, how do you think that probability should depend on n and epsilon? Suppose n is larger than some other n. Would the probability that it never goes extinct be higher? And if epsilon is smaller, probability that it never goes extinct is probably higher too. Okay, so there's no reason to think that there's not a positive probability the population never goes extinct. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
In this case, because n is a fixed set, isn't it guaranteed that eventually the number of iterations that you get more boxes as time goes on? So
The question is, if the camera couldn't hear that, okay, this is a good question. He says the population has a fixed size, capital N. And I'm speaking to you guys as well, if you couldn't hear him. There's a positive probability that a box is going to come along from anybody at any given time. Once a box, always a box. So won't there inevitably be all boxes, or won't you inevitably end up with n boxes? So he's saying won't you inevitably end up going extinct in finite time? In other words, he's saying, isn't there probability 0 that the population never goes extinct? Okay, so that's a really good question. So let me ask it again. First question, is there a positive probability that the population never goes extinct? How many people think that's true? Okay, Max and you and Trevor maybe. Okay. So the rest, and let me ask the rest of you, how many people think that there is a 0 probability that the population never goes extinct? Okay, and some people abstained. Shane, what do you think? You'll say 0 because more people said 0? Okay, well let's see. Let's see what happens. Let's do a little analysis. So here's a sort of a hand wavy. It's not really hand wavy at all, but so the answer. Okay, let's see what happens. All right, what does it mean to never go extinct? The population never goes extinct certainly means that there is no time k at which the population becomes extinct. So never goes extinct implies that there is no time k at which it goes extinct. That's really an if and only if. Okay. So that's the way we're going to look at that. There's no time k at which the population becomes extinct. Okay? And so certainly the probability that it's not extinct at time k is going to be less than or equal to, or the other way around. The probability that it never goes extinct is going to be less than or equal to the probability that it's not extinct at time k. And that's going to be true for all k bigger than 0. Now, why does that inequality hold? Well, if I'm given k and I know that the population is not extinct at time k, that's a relief. That means it might never go extinct. But in some cases, it'll go extinct at times later than k. Therefore, the probability that it's not extinct at some particular time k is bigger than the probability that it never goes extinct. But all I care about is that less than or equal to there. Okay? For all k, the probability that it never goes extinct is less than or equal to that. Now, what's the probability that it's not extinct at time k? Well, that's the probability that at least one guy has not become a box at time k. So let's look at that right-hand side of that inequality. So the probability that it's not extinct at time k is equal to the probability that at least one, and you can think of these as individuals or population positions, so to speak. There's at least one non-box in the population at time k. Right? That's what it means for the population not to be extinct at time k. Now, what is the probability that there's at least one non-box in the population at time k? Well, that's less than or equal to the sum from, say, L equals 1 to capital N of the probability that individual I, or individual L, has not boxified by time k. Why is there less than or equal to there? Well, because these events that the individual at L has not boxified by time k are not mutually exclusive. So the probability of their union, which is the probability that at least one individual has not boxified at time k is less than or equal to the sum of the individual probabilities. Okay, now assuming again that we start at 0, the all 0 population, which is pretty optimistic. So assuming that p of 0 is all zeros, so everybody's alive at time 0, what is the probability that a given individual has not boxified by time k? Anybody have a suggestion for that? Suppose I'm one of those zeros. What is the probability that I do not boxify at time 1? It drew. Yes, each of these terms is equal to 1 minus epsilon to the k. So each term equals 1 minus epsilon to the k. Because what has to happen for an individual not to boxify? He or she, I guess if you're 0 or 1, you can have a high. We'll be done in a sec. We can, I'm trying to be friendly to the people who come in because so many folks are scared. They look kind of young, don't they? What class comes in after us? Juniors? I'm getting old. Okay. So to not become a box, you either you give birth to one that looks like you, or you give birth to the other one. And those are mutually exclusive events. Each of them has probability 1 minus epsilon divided by 2. So their total probability is 1 minus epsilon. The probability you do not boxify in one step is 1 minus epsilon. And because every step, the history doesn't matter, and everything is independent, the probability the given individual has not boxified by time k, he has to do something of probability 1 minus epsilon at time 1, and probability 1 minus epsilon at time 2, and so on, all independent of each other. They multiply together. And therefore, the probability the given individual has not boxified by time k is 1 minus epsilon to the k. So this sum is equal to capital N times 1 minus epsilon to the k. Now, obviously, this inequality could be really rough for small k because capital N could make this bigger than 1. And we all know probabilities have to be less than 1. But the bottom line here is, if we start with this guy, probability that you never go extinct this is true for all k bigger than or equal to 0. The probability you never go to extinct is less than or equal to n times 1 minus epsilon to the k. Now, the probability you never go to extinct has to be a non-negative number, because all probabilities are non-negative. N is fixed. That non-negative number has to be less than or equal to this for all k. Right? What's the only non-negative number that's less than or equal to this for all k? Right. He had it. Okay. Thus, probability that you never go extinct equals 0. And point of emphasis, this is true for any capital N and for all positive epsilons. Okay? So I was hoping, Max, that you would be right, but unfortunately you were wrong. Whatever, doesn't matter. The bottom line here is that with probability 1, this simple model goes extinct. And now we're going to put some numbers to this for a very small case, like n equals 2 next time, and we'll talk about the expected time it takes to go extinct and all that stuff. But this is a preview of what's to come with Markov chains.